I watched through my kitchen window as Kenneth Hartwell, our HOA board member, wheeled my bright orange Husqvarna snowblower out of my garage like he owned the place. My coffee mug stopped halfway to my lips as disbelief flooded through me. This was the third time in 6 months that someone from the Pleasant Valley Homeowners Association in Cedar Rapids, Iowa had helped themselves to something of mine, but this was the most brazen theft yet. The morning had started normally enough. I woke up at 6:30, made my usual breakfast of eggs and toast, and settled in to check my emails before heading to work at the accounting firm downtown. February in Iowa meant snow, lots of it, and we'd gotten another 8 inches overnight. I'd already cleared my driveway at 5 in the morning before the sun came up, using that very snowblower Kenneth was now making off with. The machine was barely 2 years old, a purchase I'd saved up for after 3 winters of breaking my back with a shovel. I rushed outside in my slippers and bathrobe, not caring that the February wind cut right through the thin fabric. "Hey, Kenneth, what the hell are you doing with my snowblower?" Kenneth turned around, his face red from either the cold or embarrassment, though I suspected he was incapable of the latter emotion. He was a stocky man in his late 50s with a comb over that fooled nobody and a perpetual scowl that made him look like he'd been sucking on lemons his entire life. "This is HOA property," he said matter-of-factly, continuing to push my snowblower down my driveway toward his silver pickup truck parked on the street. "The hell it is. I bought that with my own money from Home Depot in March of 2024. I have the receipt." According to HOA Bylaws Section 12, Subsection 4, all snow removal equipment used on common areas becomes association property for shared use during winter months. I felt my blood pressure spike. That's complete nonsense, and you know it. That machine has never touched a common area. I use it on my driveway, which is my property. Kenneth stopped and pulled out his phone, scrolling through it with his thick fingers. "Says right here that you were seen using this equipment to clear the sidewalk in front of your house last month." The sidewalk is considered a common area under HOA jurisdiction. I was being a good neighbor. The city requires homeowners to clear their sidewalks within 24 hours of snowfall. That doesn't make my snowblower HOA property. Well, that's for the board to decide. In the meantime, I need to borrow this to clear my driveway. My back's been acting up. "Then buy your own snowblower, Kenneth." He'd already reached his truck and was lifting the machine into the bed with surprising strength for someone claiming back problems. "I'll return it when I'm done." "Probably tomorrow." "You're stealing my property. I'm calling the police." Kenneth climbed into his truck and rolled down the window. "Go ahead. They'll tell you it's a civil matter. Read your HOA bylaws, Marcus. Section 12, subsection 4. It's all legal." He drove off before I could respond, leaving me standing in my driveway in my bathrobe and slippers, now thoroughly soaked from the snow. My neighbor, old Tom Richardson, was scraping ice off his car windshield and had witnessed the entire exchange. "That's the third time this month Kenneth's pulled something like this," Tom called out. "Took Susan Miller's hedge trimmer 2 weeks ago, claimed it was for common area maintenance. She never got it back." I trudged back inside, my feet numb and my mind racing. This had to stop. The Pleasant Valley Homeowners Association had become increasingly tyrannical over the past year, ever since Kenneth Hartwell and his cronies had taken control of the board. What started as reasonable rules about lawn maintenance and exterior paint colors had devolved into increasingly absurd restrictions and power grabs. I changed into dry clothes and called the Cedar Rapids Police Department non-emergency line. The dispatcher listened patiently to my complaint before delivering the news I'd expected but hoped wouldn't come. Sir, if there's a dispute about property ownership under HOA rules, that's a civil matter. You'd need to take it up with the association or consult a lawyer. But he just took it from my garage without permission. Isn't that theft? Did he break into your garage? I paused. No, it was open. I just finished using the snowblower and hadn't closed the door yet. And you say he claims it's HOA property? He's lying, but yes, that's his claim. Then I'm sorry, sir, but this really is a civil dispute. We can't make an arrest based on a property ownership disagreement. You should document everything and contact a lawyer. I hung up, frustrated but not defeated. I'd moved to Pleasant Valley 3 years ago, attracted by the affordable housing and quiet streets. The HOA fees were reasonable, and the neighborhood genuinely was pleasant, full of young families and retirees who took pride in their homes. But something had shifted when the previous HOA president, a fair-minded retired teacher named Gregory Walsh, had moved to Arizona to be closer to his grandchildren. Kenneth had run for president unopposed, bringing with him a board of like-minded individuals who seemed to view the HOA as their personal fiefdom. I called my office and told them I'd be late, then spent the next hour digging through the massive binder of HOA documents I'd received when I bought my house. The bylaws were dense and written in that special kind of legalese that manages to say everything and nothing at the same time. I found Section 12, subsection 4, and read it carefully. All equipment purchased with HOA funds for the maintenance of common areas shall remain property of the association and may be used by board members as needed for association business. There was nothing about personal property becoming HOA property just because it had been used on a sidewalk. Kenneth had completely made that up, banking on my assumption that he was telling the truth. The realization made me even angrier. He wasn't just stealing my snowblower. He was lying about having the legal right to do so. I took photos of the relevant bylaws section with my phone and sent them to my email. Then I composed a formal complaint letter to the HOA board, citing the exact wording of the bylaws and demanding the immediate return of my property. I sent it to all 5 board members' email addresses, which were listed in the front of the binder. Within an hour, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "This is Marcus," I answered. "Marcus, this is Rebecca Watson. I'm the HOA secretary." Her voice was crisp and professional, the kind that made you think of pressed business suits and perfect punctuality. "I received your email about the snowblower incident. Good. Then you know Kenneth Hartwell stole my property this morning. I wouldn't characterize it as theft. Kenneth informed me he was borrowing equipment for HOA purposes." "What HOA purposes?" "He specifically said he needed it for his own driveway." There was a pause. "I'm sure there was a miscommunication. Regardless, the board will discuss this matter at our next meeting on Thursday evening. You're welcome to attend and present your case." "Thursday? That's 3 days from now." "I want my snowblower back today." "I understand your frustration, Marcus, but the board needs to review the situation properly. In the meantime, I'll make a note that you've disputed Kenneth's interpretation of the bylaws." "There's nothing to interpret. The bylaws are clear. Kenneth lied." Rebecca's tone cooled noticeably. "I'd be careful about making accusations like that. Kenneth Hartwell has served this community faithfully for years. The board takes defamation very seriously." "Are you threatening me?" "Of course not. I'm simply advising you to approach this matter professionally. We'll see you Thursday at 7 p.m. in the community center. Have a nice day." She hung up before I could respond. I stood in my kitchen, phone in hand, trying to process what had just happened. They were circling the wagons, protecting Kenneth despite his obvious wrongdoing. This wasn't just about a snowblower anymore. This was about a power structure that had become corrupt and needed to be challenged. I finally made it to work around 10, my mind still churning through possible strategies. My boss, Linda Fitzgerald, was understanding when I explained I'd had a personal emergency. I settled into my cubicle and tried to focus on the tax returns piled on my desk. But my thoughts kept drifting back to Kenneth's smug face as he drove away with my property. At lunch, I called my friend Derek Mitchell, who'd gone to law school before deciding corporate law wasn't for him and becoming a high school teacher instead. We met at a sandwich shop downtown. HOAs are the worst, Derek said around a mouthful of turkey club. They start with good intentions, but they always attract people who peaked in high school and want to feel important again. So what are my options? The police won't help and the board is backing Kenneth. Honestly, you could sue in small claims court. The snowblower's what, $1,000? $1,200, but that's not the point. I know, but legally speaking, that's your cleanest option. Sue Kenneth personally for the value of the snowblower. Let a judge sort it out. That could take months. Probably. The other option is to run for the HOA board yourself. When are elections? I thought back to the bylaws. October, that's 8 months away. Then you're kind of stuck. Unless Kenneth returns the snowblower, you're looking at either small claims court or replacing it out of pocket. This is insane. How is this legal? Derek shrugged. HOAs operate in this weird legal gray area. They have a lot of power over homeowners, but they also have to follow their own bylaws. If Kenneth violated the bylaws, you have a case. But enforcing it is the hard part. I spent the rest of the week documenting everything. I printed copies of my Home Depot receipt showing I'd purchased the snowblower with my own money. I took screenshots of my bank statement from March 2024 showing the charge. I even found the warranty registration I'd filled out online, proving the serial number on my receipt matched the machine Kenneth had taken. Thursday evening arrived cold and gray. I dressed in business casual and drove to the Pleasant Valley Community Center, a small brick building near the neighborhood entrance that hosted everything from kids' birthday parties to yoga classes. The HOA meeting room was on the second floor, a cramped space with folding chairs arranged in rows facing a long table where the board sat. I arrived 15 minutes early and was surprised to find I wasn't alone. About 20 other homeowners were already there, murmuring amongst themselves. I recognized several faces from neighborhood gatherings. Tom Richardson gave me a nod from the back row. Susan Miller, the woman who'd lost her hedge trimmer, sat in the front with her arms crossed and a determined expression. Kenneth arrived precisely at 7, followed by the other board members. Besides Rebecca Watson, there was Douglas Freeman, the treasurer, a thin, nervous man who always looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The fourth board member was Patricia Daniels, a woman in her early 60s with short gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd never smiled in her life. The fifth seat, that of vice president, was apparently vacant. Kenneth called the meeting to order and launched into the usual preliminaries, reviewing minutes from the last meeting and discussing upcoming neighborhood events. 20 minutes passed before he finally said, "Now, new business. Marcus Irving has filed a complaint regarding HOA equipment usage. Marcus, you have 5 minutes to present your case." I stood and walked to the front, my folder of documentation in hand. "Thank you." On Monday morning, February 3rd, Kenneth Hartwell entered my property and took my personal snowblower without permission. When I confronted him, he claimed it was HOA property under Section 12, subsection 4 of our bylaws. This is false. I held up my printed copy of the bylaws. Section 12, subsection 4 states, and I quote, All equipment purchased with HOA funds for the maintenance of common areas shall remain property of the association. My snowblower was purchased with my own money, as evidenced by this receipt from Home Depot. I passed copies of my documentation to each board member. I have the receipt, the bank statement showing the charge to my account, and the warranty registration with the matching serial number. This is unquestionably my personal property. Kenneth's claim that using it once on a public sidewalk somehow transferred ownership to the HOA has no basis in our bylaws or any law I'm aware of. I'm demanding the immediate return of my property and a formal apology from the board for this incident. Kenneth barely glanced at the papers in front of him. Your interpretation of the bylaws is incomplete, Marcus. There's an established precedent in this community that equipment used for community benefit becomes available for community use. This has been standard practice for years. Show me where that's written in the bylaws. It's not explicitly written. It's understood through years of practice and interpretation. That's not how contracts work, Kenneth. You can't just make up rules that aren't in the bylaws and expect us to follow them. Rebecca Watson cleared her throat. Marcus, the board has broad discretionary authority under Section 2 of the bylaws. We're empowered to make interpretations and establish practices that serve the community's best interests. I pulled out another highlighted page. Section 2 grants you authority to enforce existing rules and recommend amendments for homeowner approval. It doesn't give you the power to create new rules unilaterally, and it certainly doesn't give you the right to confiscate personal property. Susan Miller stood up from the front row. I'd like to speak. Kenneth took my hedge trimmer in January, claiming the same thing. I bought that trimmer myself 5 years ago. I've asked for it back 4 times, and each time I'm told it's being used for community maintenance. This is theft, plain and simple. Kenneth's face reddened. Mrs. Miller, this isn't the time for unrelated complaints. It's completely related. You're running a pattern of theft and justifying it with made-up rules. Other homeowners began speaking up. A man named James Chen said Kenneth had borrowed his ladder 3 months ago and never returned it. Another woman reported missing garden tools. What I'd thought was an isolated incident was apparently part of a much larger pattern. Kenneth pounded his fist on the table. Enough. This meeting will proceed in an orderly fashion, or I'll have the room cleared. On what authority? Tom Richardson called from the back. This is an open HOA meeting. Homeowners have the right to speak. The meeting devolved into chaos for the next 10 minutes, with multiple homeowners shouting complaints while Kenneth tried to restore order. Finally, Patricia Daniels, who'd been silent until now, stood and held up her hands. Everyone, please, let's handle this properly. Marcus, the board will take your complaint under advisement and provide a written response within 30 days as required by the bylaws. 30 days. I want my snowblower back now. The board needs time to review all the facts and make an informed decision. The facts are clear. Kenneth stole my property. Alleged theft, Rebecca Watson corrected. Kenneth maintains he was acting within his authority as a board member. Then let's call the police and let them decide. Kenneth finally spoke again, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Mr. Irving, if you continue to make slanderous accusations, the HOA will have no choice but to pursue legal action against you for defamation and harassment. The room went quiet. The threat hung in the air, and I could see several homeowners shifting uncomfortably in their seats. I kept my voice level. I have documentation proving ownership. I have witnesses who saw you take the snowblower. Those are facts, not slander. If you want to sue me for stating facts, go ahead. I'll countersue for theft. The meeting ended badly, with Kenneth adjourning abruptly and the board members filing out quickly. Several homeowners approached me afterward, expressing support and sharing their own stories of HOA overreach. Susan Miller suggested we form a group to push back against the board's increasingly authoritarian tactics. "We need to organize," she said. "Alone, they can intimidate us. Together, we have power." We exchanged phone numbers and agreed to meet at a local coffee shop on Saturday morning. As I drove home, I felt a mix of frustration and determination. This was bigger than my snowblower. Kenneth and his cronies had been running Pleasant Valley like their personal kingdom, and it was time someone stood up to them. Friday morning, I woke to find a letter taped to my front door. It was from the HOA, written on official letterhead and signed by Kenneth Hartwell. The letter informed me that I was being fined $500 for disrupting an official HOA meeting and making unfounded accusations against board members. Additionally, I was being cited for a bylaw violation because my garbage cans had been visible from the street after pickup hours on Wednesday. The garbage can thing was ridiculous. Pickup was at 8 a.m., and I'd brought the cans in that same evening around 6. But the bylaws did technically state that cans should be stored out of sight within 4 hours of pickup. It was one of those rules nobody enforced unless they wanted to harass someone. I took photos of the letter and added it to my growing file of documentation. Then I sent an email to Rebecca Watson disputing both the fine and the violation, again citing the specific bylaws that Kenneth was misinterpreting or ignoring. Her response came within an hour. "Your dispute has been noted. The board stands by its decision. Payment is due within 15 days to avoid additional penalties." Saturday morning, I met Susan Miller and 8 other homeowners at the Daily Grind, a coffee shop on the edge of Pleasant Valley. We took over a large table in the back corner, and Susan opened a notebook. "Okay, let's document everything. Who's had property taken or damaged by the HOA?" 4 hands went up, including mine. Susan listed each item: my snowblower, her hedge trimmer, James Chen's ladder, and a leaf blower belonging to a woman named Christine Porter. "Who's been hit with questionable fines or violations?" All 8 hands went up this time. The stories were remarkably similar. Kenneth or one of his board cronies would cite an obscure bylaw, often interpreting it in the most restrictive possible way, and issue fines ranging from $100 to $500. Some people had paid, fearing escalating penalties. Others, like me, were fighting back. Tom Richardson had been doing some research. I looked up Iowa law on HOAs. They're governed by Chapter 499B of the Iowa Code. HOAs have to follow their own bylaws, and they can't enforce rules that aren't actually written in those bylaws. Kenneth's interpretation authority has limits. So we have legal grounds to challenge him, possibly. But here's the thing, taking him to court costs money. Even small claims court has filing fees, and there's no guarantee we'll win. The cheaper option is to vote him out in October. That's 7 months away, James Chen pointed out. How much more damage will he do by then? Susan tapped her pen on the notebook. We could call a special meeting. If 10% of homeowners sign a petition, the bylaws require the board to hold a special meeting to address concerns. What would that accomplish? We could move to remove Kenneth from the board. If a majority of attending homeowners vote for removal, he's out. It was a long shot, but it was something. We spent the next hour drafting a petition and planning our strategy. Pleasant Valley had 212 homes. We needed signatures from at least 22 homeowners to trigger a special meeting. Susan volunteered to coordinate the signature gathering, and we divided up the neighborhood into sections. Over the next week, I spent my evenings going door to door, explaining what had happened and asking homeowners to sign the petition. The response was mixed. Some people were eager to sign, having their own grievances with Kenneth and the board. Others were hesitant, worried about retaliation. A few thought we were making a big deal out of nothing and refused to get involved. By the following Saturday, we had 31 signatures, well over the required threshold. Susan submitted the petition to Rebecca Watson via certified mail, requesting a special meeting to be held within 30 days as specified in the bylaws. Rebecca's response came 3 days later. The board was denying the petition, claiming that several signatures were invalid because those homeowners were behind on their HOA dues and therefore couldn't participate in HOA governance. I checked the bylaws again. There was no provision stripping voting rights from homeowners with outstanding dues. Rebecca was making it up, just like Kenneth had made up the rule about my snowblower. "They're not going to let this happen without a fight," Susan said when I called her with the news. "We need to force their hand." "How?" "File a complaint with the Iowa Attorney General's office. They have a consumer protection division that handles HOA disputes." It was worth a try. I spent an evening filling out the online complaint form, detailing Kenneth's theft of my snowblower, the questionable fines, and the board's refusal to honor a valid petition. I attached scans of all my documentation, including the bylaws, my purchase receipts, and the correspondence with the board. 2 weeks passed with no word on my snowblower. I'd had to buy a new shovel and spent my mornings doing manual labor before work, clearing snow from my driveway the old-fashioned way. We'd gotten another 6 inches on Valentine's Day, and my back was killing me. Then, on February 20th, I got a phone call from Kenneth Hartwell. "Marcus, this is Kenneth. I wanted to let you know that your snowblower encountered some mechanical issues. I'm having it repaired and I'll get it back to you as soon as possible." My grip tightened on the phone. "What kind of mechanical issues?" The engine seized up. "Seems like there might have been a manufacturing defect or something." "It was working perfectly fine when you took it. What did you do to it?" "Nothing. I was using it to clear my driveway and it just quit working." Something in his tone told me there was more to the story. "Your driveway is gravel, isn't it, Kenneth?" A pause. "Yes, why?" "Snowblowers are designed for snow, not gravel. If you tried to use it on gravel, you probably wrecked the auger and clogged the engine. That's not a manufacturing defect. That's user error." "Well, regardless of the cause, I'm having it looked at." "Who's paying for the repairs?" "We can discuss that later. I just wanted to keep you informed." He hung up before I could argue further. I immediately called Susan and filled her in. "He destroyed it," she said flatly. "And now he's trying to avoid responsibility." "Can the HOA be held liable for property damage?" "Absolutely. Especially since he took it without permission in the first place." I spent the evening researching snowblower repair costs. Engine seizures were serious and expensive to fix, often costing as much as just buying a new machine. If Kenneth had indeed damaged my snowblower by using it improperly, I was looking at a significant financial loss. The next morning, I received an email from the Iowa Attorney General's office acknowledging receipt of my complaint and informing me it would be reviewed. The email warned that the process could take several weeks or even months, depending on the complexity of the case. I couldn't wait that long. I decided to take Derek's original advice and file in small claims court. The process was surprisingly straightforward. I went to the Lynn County Courthouse in Cedar Rapids, filled out the necessary paperwork, and paid the filing fee. I was suing Kenneth Hartwell personally for $1,200, the cost of the snowblower, plus court costs. Kenneth would be served with papers within a few days, and we'd get a court date probably sometime in March or April. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was action. I also sent a formal letter to the HOA board, notifying them that I was holding Kenneth Hartwell and the Pleasant Valley Homeowners Association jointly and severally liable for the loss of my snowblower. I cited Iowa Code Chapter 499B, which made HOA board members personally liable for actions taken outside their authority, and demanded reimbursement within 30 days. The response was swift and predictable. Rebecca Watson sent a letter informing me that the HOA would be seeking legal counsel and that all future communication should go through their attorney. She also mentioned that my unpaid fines now totaled $500 plus late fees, bringing my debt to $650. I had no intention of paying a penny of those fraudulent fines, but the situation was escalating beyond simple property disputes. This was heading toward a legal battle that could cost thousands of dollars and drag on for months. Then, on March 2nd, everything changed. I was at work when I got a call from Tom Richardson. "Marcus, you need to see this. I'm forwarding you a video right now." My phone buzzed with an incoming message. I opened it to find a video file. The footage was grainy but clear enough, apparently taken from a doorbell camera. It showed Kenneth Hartwell in someone's driveway, using my orange Husqvarna snowblower. The timestamp read February 4th, the day after he'd taken it from my garage, but Kenneth wasn't clearing snow. He was running the snowblower over a gravel driveway, and I could see small rocks shooting out from the discharge chute. The machine was making awful grinding noises. Kenneth seemed to realize something was wrong because he shut it off, looked at it for a moment, then started it again and continued. Within seconds, there was a loud clanging sound and smoke began pouring from the engine. Kenneth jumped back, cursing loudly enough that the doorbell camera's microphone picked it up. The video ended with Kenneth standing over the dead snowblower, his hands on his hips, clearly frustrated. "Whose camera is this from?" I asked Tom when I called him back. "Martin Hayes, 3 houses down from Kenneth. Martin's been having issues with people cutting through his yard, so he installed cameras. He happened to check his footage and saw Kenneth destroying your snowblower. He thought you should know. This is perfect. This proves Kenneth damaged the snowblower through misuse. That's not even the best part. Look at what Kenneth's doing." I watched the video again, more carefully this time. Kenneth wasn't just clearing his driveway. He was deliberately running the snowblower over gravel, seemingly trying to push the stones around or clear them from the snow. No one who knew anything about snowblowers would do that. It was like using a vacuum cleaner to pick up broken glass. "He's an idiot," Tom said. "But you've got him dead to rights now. He stole your equipment, destroyed it through negligence, and there's video proof." I saved the video file and added it to my growing collection of evidence. Then I sent a copy to the small claims court as additional documentation for my case. I also sent a copy to the Attorney General's office, updating my complaint. That evening, I received a visit from Douglas Freeman, the HOA treasurer. He stood on my porch looking distinctly uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Marcus, can we talk?" I invited him in, curious about what brought him here. Douglas had been quiet at the board meeting, and I'd gotten the impression he wasn't entirely on board with Kenneth's tactics. "I want you to know I didn't support taking your snowblower," Douglas said once we were seated in my living room. "Kenneth made that decision on his own and told the rest of us after the fact. Why didn't you say something at the meeting?" Kenneth doesn't take well to being contradicted. The last time I questioned one of his decisions, he threatened to have me removed from the board. Can he do that? Probably not, but fighting it would be ugly, and honestly, I don't have the energy. I'm only on this board because my wife thought it would be good for me to get involved in the community. It's been nothing but headaches. "So why are you here?" Douglas took a deep breath. "Because things are getting out of hand. Kenneth's been using HOA funds for personal expenses. I've seen the bank statements. There are charges for restaurants, home improvement stores, even a golf vacation to Scottsdale. He claims they're all legitimate HOA expenses, but they're not. We don't have board dinners at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse. This was bigger than I'd thought. How much are we talking about over the past year? Close to $15,000, I whistled. That's embezzlement. Yes, it is. I've tried to raise concerns, but Rebecca backs Kenneth on everything, and Patricia just votes however Kenneth tells her to. I'm outnumbered. Why are you telling me this? Because you're fighting back. You filed with the Attorney General. You're taking Kenneth to court. Someone needs to stop him before he bankrupts the HOA, or we all end up liable for his actions. Douglas pulled a folder from his bag and handed it to me. These are copies of the bank statements and receipts. I made them when Kenneth wasn't looking. If you're going to take him down, you'll need this. I flipped through the documents. Sure enough, there were dozens of questionable charges, all made with the HOA debit card that Kenneth controlled. Restaurant bills for $200. A $700 purchase at Lowe's that was described as community maintenance supplies, but had line items for personal lawn care products. And the Scottsdale charge. A 4-day trip with hotel and golf fees totaling $3,200. Douglas, this is fraud, criminal fraud. I know. That's why I'm giving it to you. I don't have the courage to go to the police myself, but if you do, I'll back you up. After Douglas left, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the documents. My stolen snowblower suddenly seemed like a minor issue compared to systematic embezzlement of HOA funds. Every homeowner in Pleasant Valley paid dues. That money was supposed to go toward maintaining common areas, organizing community events, and covering insurance and legal expenses. Instead, Kenneth had been treating it like his personal slush fund. I called Susan Miller and arranged an emergency meeting of our homeowner group. We gathered at the Daily Grind again that night, and I laid out everything Douglas had told me and showed them the bank statements. "We need to go to the police," James Chen said immediately. "Agreed," Susan added. "This is beyond HOA politics. This is theft from all of us." The next morning, I took all my documentation, including the bank statements, to the Cedar Rapids Police Department downtown headquarters. This time, I didn't call the non-emergency line. I walked in and asked to speak with someone about financial fraud. I was directed to Detective Sarah Morrison, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who listened patiently as I explained the situation. I showed her the bank statements, the correspondence with the HOA board, and the video of Kenneth destroying my snowblower. "How many homeowners are in this association?" she asked. 212. "And what are the annual dues?" $400 per household. Detective Morrison did the quick math. So roughly $85,000 a year flowing through the HOA account. Yes. Plus, we had a special assessment last year for some repairs to the community center. That brought in another $20,000. And you're saying the board president has been misappropriating these funds for personal use? The treasurer documented $15,000 in questionable charges over the past year. There might be more. Detective Morrison made notes and copied my documents. This is definitely worth investigating. I'll need to get access to the HOA's financial records, which means I'll need a warrant. That might take a few days. In the meantime, don't discuss this with anyone except the homeowners you've already told. If Kenneth Hartwell gets wind of a police investigation, he might try to cover his tracks. I left the police station feeling like I'd finally done something meaningful. This wasn't just about getting my snowblower back anymore. This was about holding a corrupt bully accountable for abusing his power. The warrant came through 4 days later. Detective Morrison and 2 other officers showed up at Kenneth Hartwell's house on a Thursday morning with a warrant for his financial records. According to Tom Richardson, who lived close enough to see the commotion, Kenneth went ballistic, screaming about harassment and illegal searches. The police seized computers, file boxes, and Kenneth's personal phone. They also visited the bank and obtained all transaction records for the HOA account. The investigation moved quickly after that. I received a call from Detective Morrison the following Monday. "Mr. Irving, I wanted to update you on the investigation. We've identified approximately $23,000 in fraudulent charges made by Kenneth Hartwell over the past 18 months. We've also discovered that he filed false expense reports and forged signatures on approval forms. What happens now? We're bringing charges. Theft by deception, forgery, and misuse of funds. Given the amount involved, these are felonies. He'll be arrested tomorrow. What about my snowblower? That's trickier. The machine is damaged and in his garage. We can retrieve it as part of the investigation, but you'll still need to pursue civil remedies for the cost of replacement or repair." Kenneth Hartwell was arrested on March 13th. The local news picked up the story that evening. I watched the segment with a mixture of satisfaction and disbelief, as the anchor reported that a local HOA president had been charged with embezzling more than $20,000 from his homeowners association. Kenneth's mugshot flashed on the screen, his face red and angry, his comb over in disarray. My phone rang constantly that night. Homeowners wanted to know what was happening, whether their dues money was gone, and what would happen to the HOA. Susan Miller and I organized another meeting at the community center, this time with over 100 homeowners in attendance. We explained what had happened and what the police had found. The mood in the room was angry but also strangely relieved. For months, many people had felt something was wrong but couldn't quite put their finger on it. Now they knew. Rebecca Watson attended the meeting but sat in the back, looking shell-shocked. After we finished explaining the situation, she stood up. "I had no idea Kenneth was stealing," she said, her voice shaking. "I trusted him. We all did. I thought the expenses he was submitting were legitimate." "Did you ever look at the receipts?" someone called out. I glanced at them, but Kenneth said everything was board approved. I assumed he was telling the truth. It was hard to tell if Rebecca was genuinely naive or complicit. The police investigation would presumably answer that question. Patricia Daniels didn't attend the meeting at all, and Douglas Freeman sent an email resigning from the board effective immediately. The HOA was in chaos. We had no functioning board, our bank account had been frozen as part of the investigation, and we needed to figure out how to move forward. Susan Miller suggested an emergency election to form an interim board that could stabilize things until the regular October elections. We held that election 2 weeks later. Susan was voted in as interim president. I became vice president, somewhat to my surprise. Tom Richardson took on the treasurer role, and we filled out the rest of the board with level-headed homeowners who promised transparency and accountability. Our first act was to hire a forensic accountant to go through the HOA's financial records and determine exactly how much money Kenneth had stolen and how much remained in the association's accounts. The news was bad but not catastrophic. Kenneth had taken $23,000, but the HOA still had roughly $42,000 in reserves. We'd be okay financially, though we'd have to postpone some planned maintenance projects. My snowblower was returned to me by the police on March 25th. It was in worse shape than I'd imagined. The auger blades were bent and broken, Rocks had damaged the housing, and the engine had indeed seized. A repair shop quoted me $1,800 to fix it, more than the cost of a new machine. I sent Kenneth Hartwell a demand letter for $1,200, the replacement cost of the snowblower. His public defender responded that Kenneth was facing serious criminal charges and had no money to pay civil claims. I could pursue the matter in court, but collecting a judgment from someone likely headed to prison wasn't exactly promising. The small claims court hearing happened in mid-April. Kenneth didn't show up, and the judge ruled in my favor by default, awarding me $1,200 plus court costs. The judgment was essentially worthless since Kenneth had no assets, but at least I had an official ruling vindicating my position. The HOA's insurance policy covered some of the stolen funds, which helped. The carrier paid out $15,000 after the investigation confirmed embezzlement, leaving the association on somewhat stable financial footing. Kenneth Hartwell's criminal case moved through the system over the next several months. His attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor's office wasn't interested in going easy on him. The case went to trial in early August, and Kenneth was convicted on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 3, and ordered him to pay restitution to the HOA in the amount of $23,000 plus interest. Rebecca Watson was never charged with any crime. The investigation determined that she'd been negligent in her oversight responsibilities, but hadn't actively participated in the theft. She resigned from the board and kept a low profile around the neighborhood. Patricia Daniels also resigned, citing health reasons. Pleasant Valley slowly returned to normal. The new board operated with unprecedented transparency, posting all financial records online and holding monthly open forums where homeowners could voice concerns. We amended the bylaws to include stronger financial controls, requiring 2 signatures on all checks and quarterly independent audits. I used the small claims judgment and some money I'd saved to buy a new snowblower in October, a red Toro model that was even better than the Husqvarna. The first time I used it, clearing a light November snow, I felt a sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with clean pavement. It was about standing up to bullies, about community members coming together to fight corruption, and about the fact that no one person could lord their power over the rest of us anymore. Tom Richardson stopped by one afternoon while I was in the garage, organizing my tools. "You know, if you just let Kenneth keep the snowblower, none of this would have happened," he said with a grin. I laughed. "True, but then he'd still be stealing from everyone, and we'd all be wondering why our dues kept going up while nothing was getting done." Fair point. Sometimes the small fights matter. Susan Miller ran unopposed in the October elections and became the official HOA president. I stayed on as vice president, and we built a board of people who actually cared about the community rather than their own petty power trips. The changes were subtle but meaningful. Neighborhood events became fun instead of stressful obligations. People stopped living in fear of arbitrary fines and made up rule interpretations. Pleasant Valley actually became pleasant again. Kenneth Hartwell never paid a cent of restitution. He went to prison in September, and as far as I know, he's still there. The HOA wrote off the loss and moved on. Sometimes you can't get back what was taken from you, and you have to be satisfied with making sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. I ran into Douglas Freeman at the grocery store in November. He looked healthier, less stressed. "I heard you're staying on the board," he said. "Someone has to keep things running smoothly. I'm glad it's you and not me. I've never been so relieved to resign from something in my life." "Why'd you give me those bank statements, Douglas? You could have just stayed quiet. He thought about it for a moment. Because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. Kenneth was stealing from people who work hard for their money. Teachers, nurses, retirees on fixed incomes. It was wrong, and I knew it was wrong, and at some point you have to decide whether you're going to be complicit or take a stand. We talked for a few more minutes before going our separate ways. His words stuck with me, though. Taking a stand. That's what this whole thing had been about. Not the snowblower, not the HOA bylaws, not even the embezzlement, really. It was about deciding that some things are worth fighting for, even when it's easier to look the other way. The story made local news for a while, and reporters occasionally called for follow-up interviews. The Cedar Rapids Gazette ran a feature article on HOA governance and the importance of financial oversight. A state legislator even introduced a bill requiring annual financial audits for all Iowa HOAs, though I'm not sure if it ever passed. My life settled back into routine. Work, home, the occasional HOA board meeting where we discussed truly mundane things like snow removal contracts and playground maintenance schedules. It was boring and bureaucratic, and I was perfectly fine with that. Boring was good. Boring meant no one was stealing from us or abusing their authority. Sometimes on winter mornings, when I'm out clearing my driveway with my new snowblower, I think about that morning back in February when I watched Kenneth wheel my machine out of my garage. I remember the disbelief, the anger, the frustration of being told by the police that it was a civil matter and I was on my own. But I also remember the homeowners who signed the petition, who showed up to meetings, who shared their own stories of harassment and abuse. I remember Douglas Freeman finding the courage to hand over those financial records, and Detective Morrison taking the case seriously when she could have dismissed it as a petty neighborhood dispute. Change doesn't usually come from one big, dramatic moment. It comes from a lot of small decisions by ordinary people who decide they've had enough. It comes from documentation and persistence, and refusing to accept that things have to be the way they've always been. Kenneth Hartwell stole my snowblower, and he destroyed it through his own incompetence and arrogance. But in doing so, he made a mistake that brought down his entire corrupt little empire. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is also the catalyst for something better. Pleasant Valley is a good place to live now. We have block parties in the summer where kids run through sprinklers and adults grill burgers and talk about regular things instead of complaining about the HOA. We have holiday decorating contests where the prizes are homemade cookies instead of threats of fines for non-compliance. We have a community that actually feels like a community. And I have a new snowblower that works perfectly, sitting in my garage on a prominent shelf where I can see it every time I pull my car in. It's a reminder that standing up for yourself matters, that documentation and persistence pay off, and that sometimes the fight is worth it even when the outcome is uncertain. Kenneth Hartwell thought he could take whatever he wanted and make up whatever rules suited him because he had a title and a little bit of power. He was wrong. The law caught up with him. Justice, imperfect and slow as it sometimes is, eventually prevailed. And Pleasant Valley is better off without him. I still serve on the HOA board. Susan and I and the rest of the team work hard to make sure the mistakes of the past don't get repeated. We've implemented checks and balances, created transparent processes, and built a culture where homeowners feel empowered to speak up without fear of retaliation. It's not always easy. There are disagreements about priorities and budgets, debates about what rules are necessary and what rules are overly restrictive. But we handle these disputes through open discussion and democratic votes, not through intimidation and manufactured authority. The legacy of Kenneth Hartwell's crimes will last for a while. The HOA's reputation took a hit, and some prospective home buyers have expressed concern about moving into a neighborhood with such a troubled recent history. But time heals and good governance builds trust. We're getting there. Sometimes I wonder if Kenneth understands what he threw away. He had the opportunity to serve his community, to make a real positive difference in people's lives. Instead, he chose to steal and bully and abuse his position. Now he's in prison, his reputation destroyed, his freedom gone. And for what? $23,000. A few fancy meals and a golf vacation. The thing about corruption is that it's rarely worth it in the end. The short-term gains are always dwarfed by the long-term consequences. Kenneth could have been remembered as a dedicated community leader. Instead, he'll be remembered as the HOA president who went to prison for embezzlement. As for me, I got justice eventually. It took months of effort, filing complaints, gathering evidence, going to court, and working with police. It would have been easier to just buy a new snowblower and move on. But I'm glad I didn't take the easy path. Some principles are worth fighting for. The snow falls every winter in Cedar Rapids, and I'm ready for it. My driveway gets cleared efficiently with my reliable Toro snowblower. My back doesn't hurt from shoveling anymore. And when I'm done with my own driveway, I usually do my elderly neighbor's walkway too. Just being a good neighbor, the way community is supposed to work. Kenneth Hartwell stole my snowblower and destroyed it trying to use it on his gravel driveway. That single act of petty theft unraveled a pattern of corruption and brought down a tyrant. Sometimes the smallest things lead to the biggest changes. Sometimes standing up for a $1,200 machine means standing up for something much more important, something like justice and accountability, and the idea that no one is above the rules. Pleasant Valley is pleasant again. And that snowblower, the one that started it all, sits in pieces somewhere in a police evidence locker or maybe a junkyard by now. It served its purpose, even in death. It exposed a criminal and helped save a community from the small-time dictator who'd hijacked it. I don't regret a single moment of the fight, even the frustrating parts, even the moments when I wondered if it was worth the effort. It was worth it. Standing up for yourself always is. And the next time someone tries to tell me that might makes right, or that their authority trumps my property rights, I'll have a story to tell them about an HOA president who thought he was untouchable and learned otherwise. The story of my stolen snowblower became something of a legend in Pleasant Valley. New residents hear about it when they move in, a cautionary tale about HOA governance gone wrong and community members who refuse to be pushed around. It's part of our neighborhood history now, the winter when everything changed. Kenneth Hartwell will be eligible for parole in about 2 years, assuming good behavior. I don't know what he'll do when he gets out. Move away, probably. Find some other place where people don't know his history. I hope he learned something from the experience, though I'm not optimistic. Some people never learn, but Pleasant Valley learned. We learned that eternal vigilance is the price of liberty, even in a homeowners association. We learned that good governance requires participation, transparency, and accountability. We learned that when someone starts abusing power, the right response isn't to stay quiet and hope it doesn't get worse. The right response is to document everything, follow the proper channels, and when those channels fail, find new ones. My new snowblower works beautifully. It starts on the first pull every time, cuts through even the heaviest snow with ease, and I've never once been tempted to run it over gravel. I take care of it, change the oil regularly, and store it properly in my garage where it belongs, where no one can take it without permission. And every time I use it, Every time I'm out there in the cold February morning clearing my driveway while the sun comes up, I think about how a simple theft led to justice, how persistence paid off, and how sometimes the bad guys really do get what's coming to them. It's a good feeling, knowing you stood up for what was right and won. That's my story about the HOA board member who stole my snowblower and destroyed it on his gravel driveway. It's a story about corruption and justice, about community and courage, about the importance of documentation and the power of persistence. It's a story that started with anger and ended with satisfaction, with a convicted criminal behind bars and a neighborhood recovering from his abuse. And it all started because Kenneth Hartwell thought he could walk into my garage and take my property without consequences. He was wrong about that. Very, very wrong.